We have an extraordinary lineup, as you've seen in the program, of speakers today. And we have two keynote speakers who will begin the program, and then they will both take questions before we go on to the first panel. It is my great pleasure and honor to have Dr. R.K Pachauri, the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with us today, who's just flown in from New Delhi. By the way, having left his luggage behind somewhere in Europe, so we're very grateful to the enormous inconvenience that he's gone to. Dr. Pachauri is the longtime Director General of the Energy Research Institute in New Delhi, which is one of the premier think tanks working on energy and environmental issues worldwide. But for the last few years, he's also had this position of, in effect, being the world's chief climate scientist, heading this group of hundreds of scientists, many of them working on a voluntary basis under the auspices of the United Nations to pull together scientific findings every several years and to tell policymakers what they need to do. Unfortunately, I think up until this point, there has been more ignoring of the IPCC than true listening, but that has clearly begun to change. I asked Dr. Pachauri over lunch how many presidents and prime ministers he estimated he'd met with over the last few years, and unfortunately he's lost count, so I can't give you an impressive number, but it is indeed a very impressive number, and particularly, of course, since the IPCC was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, but also, of course, as governments now are looking for input as we move towards the Copenhagen conference coming up at the end of this year. Dr. Pachauri is a key person in terms of sitting next to world leaders and telling them what they need to hear. So we're incredibly grateful, Pachi, that you've taken time out of your extraordinarily busy schedule to be with us in Washington today, and we're looking forward very much to your remarks.
Thank you, Chris. I'll try to answer your question about how many presidents and prime ministers I've met in recent years, at least in part. There's one president that I've been meeting quite regularly at all kinds of conferences and have known him a number of years, and that's the president of the Worldwatch Institute, right? I'm delighted to be here, and I think this is an important occasion, and I'm impressed with the large number of distinguished people we have in this audience, which clearly attributes a great deal of importance to what you're doing, Chris. And I do want to preface my remarks by saying that what I'm going to present is essentially some of the major findings of the fourth assessment report of the IPCC. And while, of course, science moves on, knowledge is always expanding, I'd like to say that I'd like to voice a word of caution. You know, we should be very careful, particularly as objective analysts and scientists, to see that if we get a series of observations or publications in a short period of time, we shouldn't immediately jump to conclusions. And one reason why I'm saying that is because the strength of the IPCC and its credibility lies in the fact that we carry out a very balanced assessment of all the evidence that's available. And there are those who are always trying to spin theories of conspiracy against the IPCC or conspiracy attributed to the IPCC. And if we fall prey to jumping to conclusions before we've had an opportunity to carry out such a balanced assessment, we could very well be accused of being alarmist. Now, I do want to say that, yes, if you look at what's happening with climate change, the impacts that are taking place, undoubtedly, there is a worsening of the situation. And there's a worsening of the situation also because of the fact that despite the Framework Convention on Climate Change having come into existence in 1992, we've done precious little to act in implementing it. In fact, between 1970 and 2004, greenhouse gas emissions have increased by 70%. So that, I must say, is a very sad commentary on the seriousness with which the world has tackled this problem so far. But let me get on. Since I have limited time, I'm going to move on and give you some broad findings of the fourth assessment report. But an important point that I'd like to convey is that the IPCC has proven to be a unique example of how science can serve the purposes of policy making. And it's been quite remarkable, as Chris rightly mentioned, in the last year and a half or so, particularly since the fourth assessment report came out, policymakers have been very receptive to whatever we had to say. And one reason why we are given some degree of attention is because of the process that we follow. We have continuous reviews, unbiased expert reviews of the drafts of our report, and every single comment that we get has to be logged, and the authors that are responsible for producing the draft have to write exactly what they did with that specific comment. If it's accepted, it's so recorded. If it's not accepted, then you have to assign the reasons for not doing so. So it's a very transparent and a very objective process that we follow. And finally, the summary for policymakers is accepted and approved word by all the governments of the world. And I can tell you that can be a nightmare for anyone who is chairing one of those sessions, because you have about 400 or 450 people sitting over there, each one picking up every single word. But may I emphasize that this does not in any way politicize the process, because often you find that what people who are in the business of policy making suggest to you by way of wording is often a superior version from what scientists have prepared. And if the authors or the scientists who have prepared the report don't accept what comes from the floor, then I think whoever is chairing the meeting can take a stand and say, look, these guys know what they're talking about. These are the references that they're quoting. This is the reason for the position that they've taken. It's a bit of give and take, but I think in the end, science certainly wins out. These are just some numbers of the people who were involved in the fourth assessment report. And as Chris indicated, this is essentially a labor of love. Nobody gets paid by the IPCC for doing any of this work. The fact that we've had a major impact on policy, weak and inconclusive as it is so far, can be seen from the Bali Action Plan, which was adopted in December 2007, where there was considerable reference to the IPCC's synthesis report. In fact, we had requested the UNFCCC Secretariat to postpone the conference of the parties by 4 weeks, simply because our synthesis report was due to come out in November, and we wanted the negotiators to benefit from whatever knowledge was contained in that report. And I can assure you every single negotiator in Bali was carrying a copy of the synthesis report and referring to it.